Let's imagine, just for a moment, that everything we've witnessed between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively wasn't a real legal war, but a carefully constructed narrative designed to look exactly like one. Not proven, not confirmed, just a hypothetical scenario where two powerful Hollywood figures found themselves at the center of a controversy that was never meant to spiral out of control, but instead was engineered to do exactly that. In this version of events, the release of It Ends With Us, the adaptation of Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel, wasn't just another book-to-film project. It was a cultural moment waiting to explode. The story already dealt with domestic abuse, power dynamics, and emotional trauma, themes that naturally generate strong reactions. Now imagine a marketing strategy that leans into real-world tension to mirror the emotional intensity of the film itself. Blake Lively files a complaint alleging misconduct during production. The headlines erupt. Justin Baldoni denies everything and responds aggressively with legal filings of his own. The press frames it as a battle. Social media divides instantly. Suddenly, the film isn't just entertainment, it's part of a real-time drama unfolding beyond the screen. In this imagined script, the legal filings become part of the narrative machinery. Thousands of pages of documents, text messages, and internal communications surface publicly. Audio clips are referenced. Behind-the-scenes footage is released to counter specific claims. Each move generates another news cycle. Each response creates another wave of commentary. The controversy becomes bigger than the movie itself. Interviews are parsed. Body language is analyzed. Every public appearance is scrutinized. In a world where attention is currency, the dispute ensures that the film remains at the center of cultural conversation for months, even years. In this hypothetical framework, even the dismissal of Baldoni's massive countersuit becomes part of the arc. The legal setbacks create another twist. Settlement talks that reportedly go nowhere extend the tension. A trial date on the horizon keeps the spotlight alive. Instead of a typical promotional tour that fades after opening weekend, the story continues evolving. The film's themes of control, perception, and truth start to blur with the real-world debate surrounding its stars. Viewers who might never have picked up the novel now feel compelled to watch the movie just to understand the context of the feud. But this imagined scenario also demands something extraordinary: trust between two people willing to risk their reputations in the short term for long-term impact. It would require coordination at a level that withstands legal scrutiny, judicial oversight, and the unpredictability of public opinion. It would mean navigating federal court filings, sworn statements, and professional consequences as part of an elaborate performance. And that's where the hypothetical begins to strain under its own weight. Courts operate on evidence, not marketing beats. Allegations of harassment carry serious implications that extend far beyond publicity. Careers, endorsements, and personal credibility are not easily gambled. Still, the idea persists because we live in an era where spectacle often feels strategic. Audiences have seen surprise album drops staged as breakups, celebrity rivalries that conveniently align with project launches, and controversy that fuels streaming numbers. So when a film already rooted in intense emotional conflict becomes surrounded by real-world legal drama, the temptation to view it as meta-storytelling is almost irresistible. The line between authentic conflict and amplified narrative becomes blurry, especially when both sides actively release statements and evidence into the public sphere. In reality, there is no verified evidence that this was scripted. The allegations, the denials, the court proceedings, and the judicial rulings are real. The stakes are real. The reputational damage on both sides is real. But imagining it as a deliberate construction reveals something deeper about modern celebrity culture. Controversy now functions as oxygen. Whether intentional or not, once the story entered the legal system and the public arena, it became bigger than either Justin Baldoni or Blake Lively individually. It became a spectacle people couldn't stop watching.
And perhaps that's the most unsettling part of the hypothetical. Not that two actors secretly orchestrated a scandal, but that the environment surrounding them is built in such a way that even serious legal disputes can start to feel like episodes in an unfolding series. In a media ecosystem driven by constant engagement, the difference between genuine conflict and perceived narrative sometimes depends less on facts and more on how the story is consumed.
If we continue inside this hypothetical lens, the next layer to examine would be motive. In any alleged grand performance, there has to be something substantial to gain. It Ends With Us was not just another studio release. It was an adaptation of one of the most commercially successful contemporary novels of the last decade. Colleen Hoover's readership is massive, deeply loyal, and emotionally invested. A film tied to that kind of property already has built-in momentum, but controversy can magnify awareness far beyond a book's existing fanbase. In this imagined version of events, the legal clash would function as an accelerant, pushing the project from literary adaptation into full-scale cultural flashpoint. The hypothetical would suggest that both Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively understood the ecosystem they were operating in. Baldoni, known for projects centered on emotional vulnerability and relationship dynamics, had positioned himself as a filmmaker interested in difficult conversations. Lively, a global celebrity with fashion influence and mainstream appeal, brought star power that guaranteed attention. If one were scripting a media event designed to mirror the film's themes of control, perception, and trauma, what better way than to blur the line between fiction and reality? Allegations emerge, public denials follow, competing narratives circulate. Each side frames itself as responding to the other. The public becomes the jury long before any courtroom proceedings advance. In this speculative storyline, the release of text messages and behind-the-scenes footage would not be random acts of defense, but calibrated beats in a broader arc. Baldoni's decision to publicly challenge Lively's claims and file a massive countersuit could be interpreted in this imagined scenario as escalation by design, raising the stakes so dramatically that media outlets have no choice but to cover every filing and every judicial response. When portions of his lawsuit were dismissed, that too would serve as narrative tension, shifting sympathy, fueling debate, and keeping both names embedded in headlines. Even the failed settlement discussions would become part of the prolonged engagement cycle, extending visibility rather than resolving it. But sustaining such a performance would require navigating very real institutions. Federal courts do not operate as marketing platforms, and judges dismiss claims based on legal standards, not narrative convenience. A scripted controversy would demand participants willing to expose private communications, risk professional relationships, and endure unpredictable public backlash. It would also involve attorneys, publicists, production partners, and possibly insurers, all maintaining silence while the spectacle unfolds. The complexity of coordinating that level of secrecy begins to look implausible when examined closely, especially given the financial and reputational consequences tied to harassment allegations and defamation claims. What makes the hypothetical compelling, however, is not the likelihood of coordination, but the modern pattern of how celebrity disputes unfold. Public legal battles now generate engagement metrics comparable to blockbuster premieres. Social media dissects filings in real time. Online communities construct timelines, analyze body language, and debate authenticity. Whether intentional or not, the Baldoni-Lively dispute has functioned as a prolonged narrative that keeps audiences invested long after initial release buzz fades. In that sense, even without orchestration, the system itself transforms conflict into serialized content. Viewed this way, the thought experiment becomes less about accusing two individuals of manipulation and more about examining the environment surrounding them. If everything were scripted, it would reveal an industry so intertwined with spectacle that even courtroom proceedings could be perceived as promotional strategy. And even if it is not scripted, the fact that so many people can imagine it might be says something powerful about how entertainment, publicity, and legal drama now overlap in the public imagination.
If we take this hypothetical to its final layer,
The most revealing question isn't whether Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively could have scripted the controversy, but whether the system itself almost encourages narratives that feel scripted. In this imagined scenario, every development would appear timed for maximum impact. A formal complaint becomes public. A countersuit raises the financial stakes to an eye-catching level. Private messages enter court filings. Settlement discussions reportedly fail. A trial date sits on the calendar, extending attention well beyond a typical promotional cycle. Each development fuels analysis videos, opinion columns, and social media debates that keep the film and everyone connected to it in constant rotation. In this version of events, neither side would need to win in the traditional sense to benefit from the exposure. The movie's themes, power, manipulation, emotional truth, would echo in the public dispute itself, creating a strange overlap between art and reality. The audience would feel pulled into the story twice, once in theaters and once through headlines. Even skepticism would become part of the machine. The more people question whether something feels exaggerated or strategic, the more they talk about it. Engagement multiplies. Curiosity deepens. The controversy sustains its own momentum. But when you step back and examine the real-world mechanics, the theory starts to strain. Allegations of workplace misconduct carry serious legal and personal consequences. Court filings are sworn documents. Judges dismiss claims based on evidence and procedural standards, not narrative pacing. Careers can suffer permanent damage from even unproven accusations. Insurance companies, studios, legal teams, and agencies become involved in ways that are difficult to choreograph for publicity alone. The emotional toll of public scrutiny is not something most people volunteer for as a marketing tactic. The complexity and risk involved would make such a coordinated performance extraordinarily difficult to control. What remains fascinating is how easily the idea takes hold. We live in an era where celebrity conflicts sometimes align suspiciously well with release schedules, and audiences have grown increasingly aware of how publicity strategies operate. When high-profile figures engage in legal battles that unfold in public view, it can start to resemble serialized storytelling. The lines between genuine dispute and perceived strategy blur, not necessarily because something is staged, but because the media environment amplifies everything into spectacle. So, after exploring the possibility from every angle, it's important to ground this clearly. This is just my imagination, a what-if scenario examining how such a controversy might look if it were scripted. Based on available information, court proceedings, and judicial decisions, there is no verified evidence that Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively orchestrated this dispute. For now, it doesn't seem like something that was planned or performed. It appears to be a real and serious legal conflict that unfolded publicly. The idea of it being scripted is simply a reflection of how modern media has trained us to question what we see.